Dr. Porter, we have about 80 people who have joined. I've disabled the waiting room so people can join at will at this point.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Flynn. Steve, you ready?
I'm as good to go as I will be.
Okay, so you finish your pudding and you're ready to go.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, Morena, good day, good morning, good evening, good afternoon. Welcome to our Motivational Interviewing Beyond webinar. So wherever you're from, we're glad you're here. I'm looking forward to this conversation. I know how to start it, but I have no idea where it's going to go. And that's one of the things I like about the interactive nature of what we're doing here. So please put your comments in the chat. If you feel kind of strongly about something and you'd like to talk about it, let Scott McBean know. Just send him a message. Or maybe we'll just send an invite out for somebody who's who we might be interested in what they have to say. I didn't quite mean it like that, but I think y'all get what I'm saying. All right. So today, Denise, you and I had a conversation about a month ago. I was in Australia walking along the beach, and we were talking about motivational interviewing. And I asked you a question, and the question has been in my head ever since is, how good do you have to do motivational interviewing to be helpful? How good do you have to be at MI to be helpful? And we were talking about coding, and we were talking about a range of other things in the conversation, but it's been in my head, particularly when I think back over the last 25 years that I've been around motivational interviewing, and how some things have changed and some things have stayed the same. But one of the things that has changed when I met MI was it went from a counseling approach where you might think 30 to 50 to 60 minutes to 10 to 15 to 5 minutes. And I've always kind of wondered how much interviewing MI do you need to do to be helpful? And I've heard Bill say, how much can you play? How much, if you had 5 minutes with the piano versus 10 minutes, you could always play more. But I guess what I'm interested in, and I don't know about what everybody else is how much MI is enough? How much do you need to know to be helpful in motivational interviewing? And if you don't need to be mighty proficient, what can you utilize for motivational interviewing to be helpful? And if you're doing that, are you doing motivational interviewing? Now, I'll preface one more thing is that I was doing a training the other day, and we were doing the Taste of MI exercise that I think Bill and Terri thought up one evening during a training. If I'm correct, my memory serves me correct. And I was looking at those 6 questions, and I was thinking, is that MI? Would that be MI if somebody said, this is what I did? And maybe they put a few reflections in there too. And they did all that in 5 minutes. Would that be motivational interviewing? And I don't feel strongly either way, but I just keep thinking about how I use motivational interview in my practice. It's usually opportunistically. Every now and then a client comes in and I go, oh, okay, we're going to move into a motivational interviewing conversation. But there are things about MI that I was doing before I practiced MI, and there's things about MI that I do when I'm not sure if I'm doing MI. So anyway, that's my question is, what have y'all learned over the years through your extensive work in coding and practice and training about MI that makes it MI, and how much do you need to know? Steve, would you like to jump in on that, or would you want to lob it over to our panel of Terri Moyers, Denise Ernst, and Chris Wagner?
We are so lucky to have them. It's incredible. I really feel like there's nothing I want to say at this point. You put it beautifully. I've got some like maybe a firecracker or two to throw into the conversation, but not now.
Okay.
Of course you do. That should be your nickname, Firecracker. Love it.
Maybe
So let
it
me-
is. Maybe it is.
Firecracker Roman. Okay, is there any part of that or anything around that the three of y'all would just like to start a conversation with?
I'm willing to start.
Okay,
By saying, when you look at therapist research, like who's a good therapist and what kinds of therapists are effective, what you very quickly come to is that therapist effects depend a lot on the worst therapists. And so when you take out the variance that's attributable to the worst therapists, you often achieve a model of sort of the good enough therapist, right? Where the thing you got to do is you got to get rid of the worst, usually about 20% of the therapists. And when I say worst, I mean, if you rank their clients' outcomes, right? And you compare them to each other, and then you drop out the bottom, let's say, I'm making it up, but let's say 20%. Then what you see is that the rest of the therapists seem to do pretty equivalently well. And it's except then when you do also have you have the cream of the crop phenomenon, which I'm happy to talk about in a minute. But the best thing you can do to improve client outcomes in any particular group of therapists is get rid of the worst therapists. So I wonder if it's like that with MI too, that a lot of the effectiveness of MI depends on what you don't do instead of what you do. So that's a question I've been asking myself. What do you guys think about that?
I think it's always a training challenge, because people think about training as I'm going to get some new tools for my toolbox, or, skills under my belt. And it feels like there is unlearning often to be done.
Right.
Whether somebody has experience, has never practiced before, has been in the field
Right.
10, 20 years, and it's an interesting frame. Can we unlearn some things in our time together?
Right. And Chris, let me just say that causes me to pay a lot of attention to what are the barriers to people letting go of those behaviors. So I spend a lot of time when I'm thinking about training, like what are the models or the behaviors or the systemic incentives for people to behave in ways that are really antithetical to motivational interviewing. And sometimes that's a lot more interesting to me and a lot more productive in training than thinking about, okay, well, how am I going to get them to recognize, reinforce, and elicit change talk, which is also interesting to me, right? But I just think, wow, I got to think about this other stuff first.
Chris, what are some of the unlearnings that you've experienced in working with people,
I think
or the barriers?
so. I don't want to stereotype too much, but I feel like there's some differences across workplaces, professional fields. The kind of, I don't know how much of it is there's a mix of people's personal experiences and life philosophies, their professional training, but then over time, the setting that people are in really influence, how they interact with each other, I think, more than people realize. So a lot of medical settings, there's so much pressure for time. People are coming there, they want to be cured or helped or to feel better. They want some input, and people get into these patterns of we only have a little bit of time, so let me throw out some information I think you need to know, suggest what you need to do. And I don't know that is that person then when I have them in training, and how much of that is a habit, a work habit that it's not necessarily need to unlearn, but need to kind of, like the fish in water, need to get a little bit of distance and even see what they're doing. And so it's different across different settings, I feel like.
Okay.
You know, it seems, I mean, to me, and I have to say that I really view this completely, not completely differently, but very differently from having left the sort of professional places and having had some situations where I was trying to be helpful and with family members who were struggling, and I was trying to be helpful. And, you know, of course I wasn't trying to use MI because I knew better than that, but and you know that it is like the what you're talking about, Chris, the wanting to the fix it. I mean, what we've called the writing reflex or the fix it gene or whatever, that there is such a deeper level of that is this deep thing of wanting to alleviate suffering, of wanting to you know, just change things for people. It's sort of like, you know, really wanting to change the situation for someone, or really wanting to make them better, or you know, and it's really deep. It's not just, do I tell them what to do or give them advice, but it's a deeper thing, at least for me. And that brings me to the sort of what I know in the last couple of years of training, of really focusing on the mindfulness of this, of deepening, of coming from a place where where you're really listening to the person, and you're also attending to your own responses that you find coming up, and do, you know, like, oh, I want to jump in here, or I want to do this, and you're managing your own responses. And there's learning in there about actually practicing and learning how to say, oh, I feel like doing this, but I don't have to do it. Is it the right time to do this? Or what is the purpose of this that I'm going in there to say? So you know, for me, it just seems like the real, I mean, all the skills that we have are really good, but when we're not in the mindset, when we're not really in that sense of awareness of our own responses, as well as being able to really take in and not doing that constant, you know, oh, let's see, what am I going to say next kind of thing. That's where the deeper unlearning has to happen. I don't know. That's just, I mean, I know I'm learning it for myself, even after many years of practicing and trying to do it. I'm still learning how to not respond in a way that feels natural or feels driven, you know, driven to respond.
It's like that Franco.
Before we leave this topic, let me just touch on a topic that I always bring up in trainings, which is a little thing I call don't sign that contract. And don't sign that contract is about what contract have you implicitly made in the place where you work? Because Denise and Chris have talked very persuasively about the internal pressure that people feel in the writing reflex, but often with the people I work with, it's an external pressure, right? Like you're the one that's supposed to be able to change people even if they don't want to change. And that's never said explicitly, but it might as well be a signed contract, because it's the person, it's where they get their worth or their value for the organization, or at least that's what they think. Like if I can't make people change when they don't want to, then what good am I? I'm the one that people come to when they've got the drinkers and the people who won't watch their blood sugars and all those patients that drive everybody else crazy, or those people who, you know, are irritating everyone else. I'm the one that's supposed to make them change. And so what I say is don't sign that contract in your head. And that will relieve a lot of the environmental pressure you feel that keeps you from being able to be mindful and to be present and to not push people and to not spew facts at them and to not confront them, which are the things I think make it hard to do motivational interviewing.
We had somebody I think these are great points. And Steve, somebody raised his hand, and I want to see if there's a question that Steve, you were wanting to ask before we kind of drift maybe to another area.
No, sorry,
put
that
it
was
in the
just,
text?
an era. It's very early
Oh,
in
no
the morning.
worries.
Brittany. All
No
good.
worries.
Yeah, look, might be useful to distinguish between using MI and asking the question, how much expertise we need. And I've noticed a paradox there in the heart of that. And as Denise has alluded to, and in the new kind of definition of MI as a form of helpfulness potentially useful outside of the therapy world, we could distinguish between using MI on the one hand and being helpful more widely. Okay, so that's just a distinction, but it's not hard to spot a paradox here, which is if you start to think about what you don't do, the things to let go of and strip away are many of the common features of expertise in itself. You know, and I'm conscious of the fact that 35 years ago, that's what we highlighted in developing MI. So one of the things we need to let go of might be expertise in itself, obviously, because what we're suggesting in MI is that the expertise sits in the other person. And what qualities that calls for to be expert in that way is what Denise was alluding to. And I think provides a seamless journey from therapy into parenting, school teachers, sports coaches, because we identified effectively what I call the deficit detective, whose job it is to spot problems and fix them because we know what's best. And I've spotted this problem inside myself in the development of MI, to some extent in Bill, and in the development of silos of therapy, which I think is a professional arrogance that the more years I have from retiring, the more it strikes me as frankly, I'm trying to find a polite word, but how about this one, harmful?
Yeah.
Okay. How about this one, harmful? When we know, and the book that Bill and Terri wrote on effective psychotherapies highlights what is helpful in therapy. And indeed, if you look back to, am I ranting a bit here, Joel?
No, keep going, man. It's your show.
I'm happy to stop. I'll stop soon. But, you know, there's also a seamless thread that seems to run back from what Terri and Bill are saying, right back to my favorite expert therapist, if you like, and that's Jerome Frank, 1961, Persuasion and Healing. He looked beyond the potentially arrogant world of expert therapy. So there you go. I worry about the expertise of therapists quite a lot. And I wonder that 20% are not doing all that well. They're probably doing harm. And so I'm a slightly nervous boy here with a streak of fiery optimism about what it means to be helpful.
Well, Steve, can I ask you to comment on the term expertise? And to me, it seems expertise seems really different from skillfulness. Like being skillful in a conversation, or like being skillful at listening, seems really different to me in my mind from expertise in knowledge about how this works, or even the scientific stuff, or it just seems different. It doesn't seem like we want to throw out skillfulness.
Yeah, I agree with you. You know, and a person's different to a car, right? In the sense that mechanics have expertise in their head, say, Denise, whereas helping people like using MI doesn't need expertise in your head so much as other qualities that you're beautifully alluding to. And for me, the real basis of helpful expertise inside the world of therapy, which Terri and Bill and right back to Jerome Frank have highlighted, it mimics quite well the basis of helpfulness outside of therapy, which is that, you know, affection, compassion, the ability to listen, and also to look inside oneself, as you've said, Denise. these are the drivers of real expertise and helpfulness for me. I'm not sure I answered your question, but it's late in the day for me, so forgive me if I've gone around a bit.
It cued something in me. So Terry was talking about if we remove the practitioners who might be doing the most harm. And Steve, you're referring to expertise as something that may increase the harm that we might do to each other because we're too caught up in our own framing. Makes me think a little bit about training from a harm reduction perspective. So, rather than how much expertise or knowledge or skill do I need to fill people in order for them to do good MI, where do I want to start that is going to reduce harm that's already ongoing, potentially in interactions, and kind of shape it from there? Which means I don't know that there's a dose that would answer Joel's original question. I'm not even sure. I'm not entirely sure what the original question was, but how do we help people more? To me, ends up kind of coming down, how much can I help people really tune in to somebody else more? I think about there's like a head and a heart and a voice or a mouth aspect to MI. And I want to help people kind of see people, think about them the way MI kind of guides us to, that people have autonomy and people have wisdom about their own lives. They may get stuck. They may have, gotten confused or gotten off track, but that the essence of how I want to see somebody is that when they kind of get back on their game, they have, the ultimate wisdom about what their life is and who they are and what they ought to do. The heart perspective is, seeing people with respect and awe and appreciation, and really having this sense of it's sacred when we come together and we spend time together, and I need to respect that and not kind of do violence or injustice to that. And then the mouth or voice is the technology of MI that we've all been learning. And, how can I hear their language in such a way that I don't have to get lost in big abstractions about what's going on. I don't even have to know where they're going or what they ought to change or where we ought to be heading to. If I can really tune in, I'll hear when we hit those pockets in a conversation where somebody gets excited or, has that sense of uplift or a bit of confidence, or really is kind of speaking with their own voice instead of things that they think they should think or something like that. And so Denise, I think that's for me where the skill is being able to kind of see people that way, feel the respect so that I'm giving it proper attention, and then really hear, when are we hitting a place that's helpful? I've struggled with MI to some degree for the last decade of feeling like I'm supposed to know the category, because from mighty training, the first thing was like, what's the change goal? But often in clinical work, I have no idea. I mean, people think they know what a change goal is, but somebody can, be struggling with overeating processed foods, but I don't know that that's really anything related to what their actual struggle is. It could be that they don't have self-compassion and they're really struggling with themselves, and so they're stressed and doing that. It could be they're in a bad relationship that eating is a distraction from, and the comfort feel, I don't have any way to know, but I know if I can really tune in, give myself and listen, we'll find it together. Or at least I have faith that we'll find it together.
Yeah, I always like the phrase of attunement. And I first read about it through Alan Shore and his kind of psychological approach at looking at attachment theory, but looking at attunement. And then I think about motivational interviewing, and I think, that one of the things we do is we empathically attune with people through that process of accurate empathy or reflective listening. If we're doing it in that Rogerian way of trying to genuinely connect with people. Denise, you were going to say something?
Well, it just since you especially since you just brought up Rogers, it in some ways it's like the need to shift our perception and our how we see, because if we go with what Rogers said, that everyone, like you just mentioned, Chris, everyone has the within them has the wisdom, and they're the ones that know, and they have it. Our job is to set this condition, is to try to participate in this condition. It's like we have to be able to see that and hear evidence of it, like and get out of ourselves, out of our own thoughts about what it should be, and see and be able to see that wholeness that's there, if you will, and help encourage them to see it themselves. But it's like really trusting in what Rogers, in that trusting that they really do. That seems to me so much of a trouble in many situations where people work. They don't really have that sense of trust in their clients. And that is probably something that causes harm, is when you don't really trust your client, no matter how good at doing the stuff you are. If you don't really trust them to pick up the mantle for themselves, or to be able to do that, it's hard. And I don't know how in training, I mean, other than really having some serious self-reflection about where are you with this, and how do you know if you trust your clients? I don't know how else you can do it. Because really touching in that sense of trust requires a lot of self-reflection, which, most of our clients aren't really very skilled in self-reflection. And that's part of what we're helping them with. But we have to be able to do it ourselves and recognize when we aren't trusting. We aren't trusting the process, or we aren't trusting the client, or where we're guarded.
So let me just challenge that a little bit, Denise.
Please.
With the sort of corresponding finding about ranking therapists, which is that the top therapists, the therapists that are really at the top of the effectiveness ranking, when you look at studies like this, are like 4 or 5 times better than the therapists who are at the bottom. The therapists at the bottom, actually, their clients are worse, and they have more sessions, and they end up worse off than when they started. And when you look at the top therapists, their clients get way better, way faster. The interesting thing to me, one of the interesting things is that even among the really good therapists, they're not good with every kind of patient. So they tend to specialize, and they tend to be good with certain kinds of patients. And to me, that really speaks to the issue of expertise being something that has to do with some kind of experience and knowledge about a particular area, right? Or a certain kind of problem. Because even if you're what they call if you're a super shrink, even if you're a super shrink, you're not going to be good with every kind of client.
Right.
So what does that mean, do you think?
Well, I just had a flash on that, remembering in training when I had my first bipolar client, and I was just struggling to beat the band. And
I remember.
And but what it really came down to was that my personal experience, and my family, having grown up with a bipolar father and gone through all of that, what was happening, it was like being able to find my grounding and being able to find that sense of trust at that point was with someone who was struggling with that was not really possible. I mean, it took me years. I mean, where now I might be able to, because I've done a lot of my own work on what it was like to come from that kind of childhood, and understand it more. Then now I can actually use that experience to help now I can, it builds empathy when I do it. But it took a lot of work and a lot of self-reflection and a lot of my own internal work to get to the point where I was able to use it to be helpful rather than to go, ah, I can't do this, which is where it started.
Well,
And,
this is a conversation that I
could
didn't.
easily be across other, I mean, I'm not saying it's always a personal situation, but that's what that brought up for me.
Well, I mean, I was saying, I like the way this conversation is just moving. And what we're talking about lots of different things in regards to helping people, and Terri, I think you're spot on about the expertise thing, because nobody can know everything. And I think I would rather know a lot about some things than a little bit about a lot of things when it comes to therapy. Because if I think I have a toolbox with all the tools in it, I'm probably going to end up hurting people and working with people that I have no competence to work with. And I know what it feels like to be sitting with a client and go, I don't know what's happening here. I don't know where to go. And I was working with a young man a couple of weeks ago, and he's diagnosed, and he uses the word autistic, and he's really struggling, and we have good rapport, and he's struggling with interpersonal stuff, and he was crying, and he said, I really need you to help me with this. And in my head, I was going, I don't know where to start. And so I had
that could
I had to
just as
share that
easily,
with him.
yeah, that could just as easily be the thing that's helpful, is that you are acknowledging and a little bit humble about your lack of ability to be the expert.
I told him I'm on new territory and I'm in here with you, and we can look together and try to, and that's been really helpful. But I think humility is a key thing that you said. I think in thinking about Denise, what you were saying, it takes a lot of self-honesty too. And it takes a willingness to explore what barriers within me might be existing, or where I might be getting, my things I don't see, right?
Yeah.
Things that that Johari's window, right? Things that you see, Denise, but I don't see, or maybe that neither one of us see. But I got to be willing to go there.
Yeah,
Getting that place that Chris was talking about, and y'all have been talking about. Steve, but do you need all that for MI?
Well, there's a quality to this conversation that at moments is saying the problem's out there, that perhaps in a diagnostic category. And I'm worried about therapy silos, as I've said, let alone diagnostic categories, because running right through this conversation, I think probably most clearly articulated thus far by Chris, is being helpful. And I would much prefer there to be a new field called helpology and harmology, where we clarify what being helpful is and what being harmful is. And I think there's the wisdom in this group, and especially in some of the people who are with us today, to clarify what that is. And so I remain hopeful that one day a field called helpology will be constructed.
Well, we had the webinar on Harmology, and I think some real good nuggets came out of that I still think about. But I do think being helpful, that's what we're trying to do in this field. We want to be helpful.
Well, look, man,
I've given up wanting to be right. I just want to be helpful. And
can
silos put us in that category of I'm right.
Can I just be blunt? I think we have identified some of the key elements of what it means to be helpful. Denise and Chris have been golden on this, right? And look, my 13-year-old says to me, he knows I'm being driven mad by his use of screens, right? So he says to me 3 days ago, hey, Dad, would you mind if you got off my back for 2 days? Because I do want to cut down my use of screens, note the change talk. But I'm sick of you being on my back all the time. So could you get off my back for 2 days? And then we can have a discussion about what to do, right? So we're driving in the car now, and I say, hey, boy, do you realize it's 3 days now, right? Not 2, right? And he starts sliding his way out of it, right? So I burst into laughter, right? And I say, well, okay, tomorrow midday, that's when the real stuff's going to happen. And he laughs. Now, I noticed the change talk, okay, and that it's probably an element of being helpful to be able to spot that. Also noticed my deep affection for him and my capacity for joy with him, despite this quite severe behavioral problem of all the time, right? Mm-hmm. And I think I'm being manipulated a little bit, but I think I'm trying to keep to being helpful rather than fixing a problem. And I'm conscious, so I'm just trying to clarify what the elements of helpfulness might be. I'm also conscious of the fact that I'm regulated emotionally, hence my ability to laugh and express joy and affection. And I think being emotionally regulated and calm in the situation allows us to express that very affection. And, you know, if I think about Terri's really high-end, kind of top-end video demos of MI, she's like playing with the person. She's enjoying their company. So I think joyfulness is an element of helpfulness. I noticed it today in the car. Whether I would say that tomorrow after midday is another question. I hold my judgment.
Steve, do you remember when we were talking, I think Molly McGill might have been on, and we were talking about how motivational interviewing can help kind of emotionally regulate the therapist or the helper? Having some structure and a focus.
Biggest challenge for me over 40 years, and it remains one. And biggest impediment to my practice of MI has been an inability to regulate myself emotionally, and also feeling that I've got to be clever. Cleverness has been rampant because I'm apparently an expert. Right. I'm going to shut up. I hope that's helpful what I said.
Well, our boss here, Dr. Heather Flynn, has a key question. I think that is a key question is helpful. How is helpfulness defined? I don't know, Heather, if you want to come in and share your thoughts about that, or you're putting it. Denise is saying yes, please.
So I took the host liberty of spotlighting myself, which is very unlike me. But I'm responding to some of the chatter in the chat that, you know, this is a very deep conversation about a lot of self-reflection and reflection on how counselors or just anybody can be helpful to somebody else. And it seems that a natural outgrowth of that is, what do we mean by helpful? Because I would imagine that your son in that scenario, Steve, found, you know, had a good experience with you, bringing some joy and laughter and not trying to fix the problem. That was probably a good thing. But I think that it is, for me as a clinician, an important question is, what do we mean by helpful? Do we mean the person wants to keep talking to us? Do we mean that they feel opened up to explore things in a way they haven't explored before, because they're feeling that they're sitting with somebody with the heart, mouth, and mind that Chris described so beautifully? Because I think a lot of us do have that sense that that's really the conditions for people to have a sense of openness to explore things in a different way. And I'm also thinking about a lot of work going around the globe on dissemination of evidence-based therapies, to shifting away from mental health professionals to community health workers, peers. This is a global phenomenon, this task shifting to different types of folks around the world. And in those under-resourced areas, there's not a lot of time for supervision, training. I mean, you don't get a lot of time. And so you all have done decades probably of work on self-reflection, exploration, reading the literature, you know, going to trainings. We're with some of the best trained people in the world right now. But you kind of wonder, how do you distill what you guys are talking about to helping the front line really around the world, which are people who are untrained in psychotherapy, to be helpful. And a lot of times they sign that unsigned contract, Terri. They're trying to get people in their communities to not be depressed anymore or to not be suicidal. And so I'm just thinking about how much training is enough, and can we train what we're talking about now in that way?
Yeah, music to my ears. I completely agree. And we want to be able to answer this question: what does it mean to be helpful? What are the key elements of helpfulness? Because if they can be distilled, then it's possible we can have an impact on the very people you're describing. So I'm not being I'm being serious when I say I think there should be a field called helpfulness and homology.
For me, I want to go back to there's been some talk about helpfulness is defined by the person who's being interacted with, right? Which I hope we would all agree with. I mean, that's what counts. But along the way, you know, I'm trying to help them find that place. And so I really, you know, again, I just want to go back to what MI has taught me, is that tuning in, listening. I think for me, MI doesn't give enough attention to tone and emotion and nonverbals and things, because the model is very focused on language, and which is very important part, but the whole being of somebody, that if I can really pay attention to them, I'll see the emotional regulation come in. I'll see distress go down. I'll see them become less confused and just clearer. And I think for me, in my head, the goal that I have with MI is not kind of helping somebody prepare to be stronger to meet the challenge, but just to help them find change, to seem more natural, to seem like, you know, it's still difficult and it still involves a lot of work and maintenance and planning a lot of times, but that it becomes doable. It becomes something that fits with, I know this fits with who I am and kind of what I want. And so for me, helpfulness is I don't know if it was, Steve, when you say what are the elements, I don't know if it's something we define as here are elements of things we do, but they're elements of a process that I'm looking for.
Exactly. And I think there are some skills associated with it. And Denise has helped us with that distinction nicely. And one of the elements I wish we'd put into MI more, and which certainly should feature in a model of helpfulness, is checking it out with the person, which I never did enough of. And I found that since I've moved into sport, like on the side of the field the other day, the guy comes to me and he says, "Steve, I'm trembling and I had a panic attack on the way to the game. What should I do?" So I, you know, instead of feeling this incredible tension and actually emotional dysregulation, I said, "What do you think will be helpful?" And he smiled at me and he said, "Ah, so you think the answer's in me?" I said, "Well, I'm wondering." And he says, "But that's why I came to see you. I want the answer from you." So we both smiled, and the affection between us allowed me to launch into a slightly wacko suggestion to him, which he loved, and he smiled and he threw his arms around me and he survived the evening. Now, I think affection and laughter and checking things out with the person regularly through a conversation, is this helpful? What might be more helpful? That will help us be helpful.
I gotta ask, Steve, what was your wacko recommendation?
I can't because it involved a swear word. But if you allow me
You
not
can
to
swear.
use a swear word, it was maybe now it's time. And he looked at me and he said, "What do you mean?" I said, maybe now it's just time. You know how to do it. You need to go out there. Maybe it's just time. And he said,
Gotcha.
time? Yeah. And I said, yeah, maybe. And he said, yeah, okay, it's time. And he strutted out. So, you know, and I think Jerome Frank would have a lot to say about persuasion and healing in that sort of scenario. There were some elements of almost like witch doctor practice. I became conscious of this is like mad, this conversation, yet it's healing and helpful for him. And so I think when we try to work out what helpfulness is, we should all read Jerome Frank. I would anyway.
All right, 1961, Jerome Frank, time to revisit.
They're later editions. They are much later editions, updated editions of that book.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I agree. The checking out's really important. As you go. I mean, obviously with MI, how people are talking about change is a pretty good proxy of how things are going in general. The more positively and frequently they're talking about change, the more they're perhaps moving in that direction, as opposed to arguing with me about why they don't want to change. So I think that's been really helpful to me in terms of my practice, but also just, you know, just asking people, how was the session? Was this helpful for you today? Particularly if I'm wondering if it was helpful. And I'm always surprised that people will say, yeah, it was really helpful. You know, I just needed to talk out loud about what was going on in my head. And I'm like, all right, we can do that. So let's kind of pull this into MI for a little while, and it may go off in a different direction. What is it about MI that is helpful? Is it all a package? Is it the change talk? Is it the relational part of it? Or is it both together? And do you need both together to be helpful?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, you
I
need
wondered.
you. I still love Bill and Steve's spirit and technical elements of MI together. So I think yes, the answer is yes for that. But I think one of the things about the spirit of MI, or one of the underlying or core elements of MI that doesn't get talked about a lot, is that motivational interviewing implicitly views motivation as already existing within the client. And that's a very Rogerian approach, right? Like there's a drive toward health inside the client, and your job is really to evoke that or to elicit that, as opposed to creating it. And the reason I feel like that is revolutionary, absolutely revolutionary in the world of psychotherapy, is that people who try to create motivation for change from scratch in people and don't have this idea that it's already there and they want to elicit that, they are very quickly helpless and demoralized as therapists. And that's, I think, when they start doing some of those things that are that are harmful. So I think sometimes the underlying philosophical beliefs behind motivational interviewing, and I could talk about some other ones as well, but that I like that one first, are sort of the unrecognized elements of helpfulness that really aren't necessarily spirit and aren't necessarily technical. What do you guys think about that?
Thumbs up from Denise. Would you like to elaborate more?
No, I think that's I mean, one of the things that I know I did in at least some in training was to have people identify their underlying beliefs and go through some of those things, like, you know, where does motivation lie? And it's similar to that issue of trusting the client, but those really matter. And it really matters. If what you believe really matters in terms of what happens, how you even use your skills, and where it goes. And I also think there's all this stuff going on about manuals in the I mean, I happen to be have been involved in the development of many manuals, but you know, there's a part of me that says anything can be helpful if it's the right match with the client. So if it's the right match with the person delivering it and the client. So there are all these things out there, all these really useful things out there that can be helpful if we just learn how to attune and match it with the client. And by asking them, because some people really want step by step. And I think about one of the things that came up in the Harmology when we were doing Harmology, and Steve, that you've referred to before, is that, you know, there are times when giving people the knowledge, the expertise, or the advice, or the suggestion, or whatever, is absolutely the thing that's helpful. If the context, if the context in the relationship is intact and there's autonomy is supported, it is absolutely the most helpful thing you can do. And so if we went away from, like, we never want to add in our, you know, the pieces that we have to be helpful, even with outside of therapy, you know, sometimes having that information or whatever it is can be really helpful for the situation.
Yeah, haven't got a lot to add to that, Denise, because I completely agree. And that scenario with the athlete was accompanied by change talk when he went out to perform, and the integration of skillful advice giving with an awareness of what helpfulness and MI isn't all that complex. And I like to see them integrated. And we have tried to do that, but it's been a big learning for me over the last 10, 15 years that skillful advice giving, skillful feedback, skillful use of expertise is probably where we could make the most progress in helping teachers and parents, sports coaches and counselors to be more effective. So, yeah.
So it's not having the expertise, it's what you do with it and how you do it.
I don't know. Kind of makes me crazy. That kind of makes me crazy. I mean, I'm just enough of a clinical scientist that I just get crazy in discussions like this, because it's like, if a person has a mouse phobia, I want them to have exposure and response prevention. I don't care if it comes from a manual, right? That's what I want them to get if they come to a provider. And I'm not going to be happy if they don't get that. But that procedure or that technique comes through the person of a therapist, at least usually, right? And so you can't be a jerk and deliver exposure and response prevention and expect it to work. You can't be a person who thinks, oh, exposure and response prevention from my beautiful mind injected into this person is going to work. Yes, exposure and response prevention is what I want you to have, but I want you to have it in a particular philosophical and interpersonal context that will let it work, right?
Yeah. Well, I think there's a big difference between expertise on how to do something and using it, and I think we should, versus sometimes using our expertise to direct it towards who someone it should be or what they should choose for their life. And what you're talking about, Terri, is we should never inhibit the knowledge and skills and expertise we have to help somebody. You know, how can they achieve a goal that's important to them? On the front end, though, if that person isn't sure that they want to get over their mouse phobia, we have some work to do to figure out where that fits in.
Or even if they are, they really want to get over their mouse phobia, they're probably going to be ambivalent about doing the crap that we want them to do it, right?
Yeah, because a lot of phobia is believing there is no world in which I could not have this phobia.
Correct.
And so you got to kind of work through some of that first.
What you're asking me to do is damn crazy. right? I have to touch a mouse. That's just crazy. I'm not going to do that, right? You better have some interpersonal skills if you're going to get into that situation with the person and not just have a damn manual that says, oh, here's the picture of a mouse. First, we look at that, then there's a stuffed mouse and we look at that. And then there's a real mouse and we get, 5 feet from it, right? All that's good.
Right.
Terry,
So-
I've always loved the way you express your thoughts. The 20 some years I've known you, that's one of the things I genuinely admire about you.
Oh, thank you, Joel.
So maybe a bit of a step. It's quite a leap, Terry, to be talking about mice right after you're talking about like Rogers and philosophy of being.
Sorry.
No, that's fun. That's
Too
what's fun with me.
fast.
But to go back to that, like I'm not sure that I believe the answer is always in people. It's something I'm looking for, but depending on somebody's history, it could be something they have that's gotten covered up.
Yeah.
Or it could be somebody who grew up in an environment of trauma that they don't have the answer. But as we work together and they may try things on, try habits out, try new ways of thinking, they'll work towards something that does align with something deeper, genuine. Even if they don't have it in their heads, they can't find it. It wasn't there ahead of time. I'm looking for something that they end up feeling really attuned to. There's that word again.
So I think that's an example of that clinically is depression, major depression, right? So I think motivational interviewing is not that astoundingly helpful with people who have major depression. And I think a much more structured approach where you're lending a lot of knowledge, lending a lot of encouragement, doing a lot of a lot more structure and persuasion is helpful. Whereas I think what I would consider sort of classic motivational interviewing is not.
Yeah.
I'm very glad you brought that up because I was having this reaction when you all were speaking, which I couldn't resist jumping in about the whole manualized approach and whether or not that's ever helpful. And you were talking about the mice phobia or the mouse phobia. I work exclusively in medical settings with physicians, and nothing against any physician in the group, but most physicians have not learned this approach. And I'm sitting here thinking millions and millions of patients have been significantly helped by physicians who know nothing about any of this, but they know how to treat something and how to fix somebody. But then my thinking evolved in the last 2 minutes about the fact that in medicine, so much of somebody getting better is related to what the patient decides to do or not do with that information. So there is a huge motivational component to taking a medicine or seeing a specialist or adhering to physical therapy or whatever it is. It's that we know is going to get a person better. Same with depression. I do think there's a role of motivational interviewing in depression treatment when somebody gets ambivalence about the behavior change they need to do to get better, like taking the medicine or having that conversation with the spouse or whatever. And so, it's just kind of making me think that a lot of the gaps that we see in medical outcomes maybe it would be better if physicians, or at least the helpers and the connectors, were trained in this approach. I don't know what you guys think about that, because it's, I'm just really struck by the fact that the majority of people who help others in medicine aren't trained in what we're talking about.
Yeah. I think for me, again, if we think about the expertise is in learning process, focusing on process, how can we use a process in a setting with a person? One of the things motivational interviewing has really helped me with is the scope. You can get really narrow and have one very specific behavior change. Like I'm trying to get to the gym right after work, before everything, or whatever it is, or before work. Or you can get really broad and think recovery and all of the elements involved in that. You can get deep into identity. And the thing I like about MI is there's not a definition of what the person is supposed to be changing or what they're supposed to do, but a process for helping the person find that. So like Terry and Heather, when you're talking about depression, so some of my work has been working with people with chronic depression who don't even know what life is like outside of that, don't know what their preferences are, what they like, not even clear about so many things about why they're depressed, because they haven't ever had periods or don't recall periods of not being depressed to compare to, which allows for ambivalence when you have kind of two sides of experience that you get to go back and forth between. And I don't think classic MI is helpful there. I mean, it's obviously the person-centered, respectful, evoking part is, but you got to start really small and just help somebody start to learn who they are. And it's a long way from there to moving out of depression.
Yeah, I've got a feeling that we might be limiting ourselves by having a sort of like the constraints of this is MI and this is some other form of therapy. Because if I say, Chris, Terri, if I put someone who is feeling demoralized, I don't want to use the word depression, let's just say this person's very demoralized. And I said to you, do us a favor, be as helpful as you can. I reckon you'd probably both swing between moment. There'd be a foundation that we'd readily agree, which is what helpfulness provides, the fuel for helpfulness, and genuineness and authenticity and compassion, warmth, a capacity to listen, all of these things. And then I suspect what we'd see is that you'd manage this potentially chaotic conversation, because these conversations aren't easy, with elements of MI in there, because you'd notice the change talk, but you might provide more structure. And I think my instinct, am I not right, is that you will be displaying the essence of helpfulness. Not saying to yourself, I'm using MI, I'm not using MI, I'm doing a more structured approach. You'll be interweaving various forms of helpfulness skills as you move along and clarify what might serve this person's interests best. Maybe I'm wrong.
I don't think you're wrong.
Yeah,
But another thing that I thought of, I just did a little workshop on hope, and hope is my favorite topic right now. But one of the things, and it actually came out of Bill and Terry's book on clinical effectiveness, on where one of the things that we typically fall down on in terms of conveying our expertise is conveying our confidence. That one of the ways, especially with people who are in that more depressive type state, that conveying our confidence in our own ability, and conveying our to help, and conveying our confidence in the methods that we're using, or our abilities to work with the person, or our willingness to engage with them. Like Joel was mentioning, I'm here with you, and I'm going to work with you through this. And I don't know everything what I'm doing, because this is not my area, but I'm willing to work with you. That being able to convey our own confidence in ourselves. And it was really interesting that when we had people do this in the training, and I've done it a couple of times, and it's so hard for clinicians, like, or I don't even care if they're clinicians in this realm, but to feel like they're tooting their own horn or whatever, to be able to convey that. But it does seem like it's a really important part. Here's what I feel like I have the capacity to do to help you. You can determine what will be helpful, but here's what I have to offer, and here's why I feel like I can do it, and here's why I think it might work. And be able to offer that. I don't know. Just struck me as you were talking about that we don't do that very well.
I like the hope theme. I've really resonated to the putting empowerment as obviously I really like growth, and I really like empowerment with the new model. I feel like neither has been fully fleshed out, elucidated. They're not quite there, but you know, autonomy to me is the freedom to be able to, you know, choose what we want, and empowerment is that plus the ability, and, you know, to really make it happen. And I think hope fits in there, because without hope, you won't ever turn autonomy into empowerment. There's so many people that I really want to hear from that I'm seeing appear on the screen.
Yeah, well, I was just thinking that, you know, we've kind of crossed into the last, you know, 20, 25 minutes. And how about, if y'all are okay with it, Nora has her hand raised. Let's get some of the audience participation. So Nora, we can invite you to come in, or you can chat it, whatever you want to do.
May I share here? Yeah.
Yes.
Hi. Oh, okay. I teach motivational interviewing to dental students as part of their communication skills training. So I'm not a therapist. I'm coming to you from health sciences education. And I have what might sound like a very basic question. Like I love teaching, and students appreciate the pillars of motivational interviewing: the listening, the body language, the building trust. But when it comes to behaviors that are not, like when we talk about regular brushing or flossing your teeth, right? These are behaviors that if I were to link them to values, or to help people find the motivation to do such behaviors that are not really, like, it's not like going to the gym because you value, you know, being in shape and not getting sick, or these are like behaviors that, to me, to them as dentists, they see how important they are for their patients. But when it comes to, you know, finding sort of that inner motivation, or helping them articulate change talk, it just seems so difficult, if I may say. So I know I'm diverting maybe to something very personal, but just wanted to share that. But thank you.
Thanks, Nora. This is and I'm sure people have some thoughts, but this is a thinking out loud kind of place. So I'm curious what other people might be thinking about what Nora said.
Can I respond just briefly? So,
Yeah.
Nora, I can't claim expertise at all, but spent about 5 years working with dental students, right? And so the two of the frames for me in training, one is just helping people think about you're not doctors of teeth, but you're doctors of people with teeth. And for the, you know, in the training, that framing would help move away from, let me tell you these things you want to do. Of course, we had the hierarchy between hygienists and the dentist, and some of the dentists didn't want to talk about dental hygiene because they seemed kind of above it or something, you know. But the motivation is, it's not one that there's often a lot of conflict about, a lot of ambivalence, but the joy of feeling your teeth clean and having a shiny mouth, and just that happiness seem to be more motivating with patients than that, oh, I have to do this every day because somebody says I'm supposed to.
I'll never forget a training, an exercise, you know, a demonstration I did in training, where the person, you know, I was asked for a volunteer, and they wanted to talk about eating more broccoli. And I thought, oh boy, this isn't going to go anywhere. And actually, I was absolutely stunned at how deep and value connected that conversation went, even in 15 minutes, that given with that, you know, with that type of conversation, it went really deep. And you think about teeth and the importance, and many people will have had the experience of elders in their life having lost their teeth, or having, and not speak of the cost of if you don't take care of your teeth. But there may be way more there. Now, you know, you can only do so much in that small amount of time, but I believe that there are values underlying every single behavior, all of them. and that there's stuff there.
Yeah.
Well, I agree with you, Denise, and I think Hannah might have mentioned autonomy and choice in the chat, and I think, you know, values underpin the choices that we make, and having choice is probably one of the most powerful things that we have in regards to kind of negotiating and getting through life. So
And I
making
thought-
conscious choices is, I think, is really important. I think MI is really helpful with that too, because as a practitioner, you know, I may not agree, but I have to accept that some people don't want to make the choices that might be in their best interest.
I can see a thread there of some of the principles of helpfulness, and also one of the joys of working in motivational interviewing, which is person-centered practice. So that you'd say person first, dental, patient second. And I hear it in sport. It's a thread that runs through swathes of sport, which is person first, athlete second. Young person first, failing student second. So that's a wonderful inheritance from, maybe it's not just an inheritance from Rogers, because in sport, I don't come across anybody, even the academics, referencing Rogers or client-centered counseling. So there's something that preceded Rogers to do with person-centeredness. I don't know what it is, but I think person-centeredness is sounds like, listening to Denise and Chris, sounds like a key feature of what it means to be helpful.
Well, John
Just-
Wooden would who was a very famous basketball coach, would certainly talk about the importance of values and the person as his focus before their ability to, you know, perform in a certain context.
And the wonderful Chris Dunn, who's a dear old friend of all of ours, he was one of the first students of Dick Fosbury in the high jump. And he was one of the first athletes, high jumpers, to practice high jumping in Olympics using the Fosbury flop. And he described to me a few years ago a reunion he had with Dick Fosbury. And Dick Fosbury, like Wooten, person first, his practice of coaching so resembled what we would call person-centered care. It's uncanny.
Yeah, I always laugh when I hear Chris Dunn, because I've had some very funny moments with him when he was around going to the Mint forums and things. And then Dave Rosengren's stories are great.
So I'm going to stay on, but I'm going to cut my camera off. I would love not to call people out. I can only see a few people, but I would love to hear Jen Luther's thoughts on how any of this fits with criminal justice. Jen, sorry, I see your face. Or Tiffany's thoughts, because I'm aware that like some of the way we think about training is influenced by industrial society and colonialism and this idea of parts and, you know, teaching individual parts. And it feels like there's something holistic here. I don't know who else is out there, but I'm just going to duck out. I see Ariel too. Just people, let other people talk. So
Scott, would you invite Tip and then Jen to come on?
Scott had to go, but feel free to unmute.
Tiffany, are you there?
You want
Sure,
Tip first?
We'll let Jen
Sure.
bring it home.
Gosh. I'm still thinking. I don't think I've got any thoughts formulated right now. It's still in the thinking, considering, pondering process. But there is a difference in where, like I've noticed, there was a comment made earlier about the role of hope in bringing about autonomy and empowerment. That's a really individualistic way of seeing it, because with Te Ao Māori, it's the collective. You can be hopeless, but if you have a connection to people around you, that can that can help people feel a sense of autonomy and move into a sense of hope. So you don't need hope necessarily if you have community. if you have, and we work out of a sense of a collective.
What a
Just
lovely
simple.
contribution.
Yeah, absolutely. Jim,
There's so much
always like here.
there's so much wonderful thinking going on here. I don't know how much I can really contribute. I guess I had a couple of thoughts along the way. And I'm going to go back just to the untraining kind of piece, because I thought that was a really interesting discussion. I know everyone on this call has had the experience of feeling like some of the people in the class that have the least amount of training are the easiest to train because you're not untraining the old habits. And what's a habit and what's a bad practice for other reasons. And I just wondered, like, as I thought that through, I thought how it's more problem focused than solution focused. And don't we just, by training the new stuff, help people to have those aha moments on their own and focus more just on the solution? So that was one of my kind of maybe ahas for me personally. The other piece was really about, and I put this in the chat, about Bill's talk on social dominance and how that's really focused on the client behavior. But in this discussion, it became, to my mind, also maybe a therapist or a practitioner behavior that may come from a place of, hey, I'm in charge here. This is certainly true in criminal justice. And I'm going to be helpful because I have this expertise and these skills that help you figure out what's up with behavior change. And yeah, you're an expert on yourself, but I'm endowed with these skills, and doesn't that put us almost in this higher ground? But overarchingly, I feel that the main thing I'm going to take away from today is that we're all people, and that's the X factor. And we're all people who are very in tuned to tuning in, whether we know it or not, to the other people that we're in conversation with. And we pick up on the nuances of things. We pick up on the micro expressions. We pick up on the feeling and the meaning of the conversation. So it's part art, part science, right? You can get away with a whole lot of stuff. Even your words can be kind of off color if you come from this place of love, kindness, humor, rapport, understanding. So those are the things I'm kind of taking away.
Well, thank you, Jim, for dropping those nuggets of wisdom in. But I agree with you. It's the person, not only the client, it's ourselves. Which, in psychotherapy training, the self in therapy, was a thing at one time. You don't hear much about these things now.
One other thing I just will say here on case management, a lot of times when we've looked to see what makes case management successful, and we've even trained some stuff around if someone's on your caseload and you're not connecting with them, what are the steps to move them to someone else's caseload? Like at some point, if this is, and we're human beings too, so we don't necessarily connect just right with each person. How do we help systems learn that it's okay to move someone from your caseload to someone else's caseload? And what might that look like? So I'm kind of curious what other people think about that.
I'm going to leave it open if somebody wants to start that. I'm aware of the time too, but that's not a bad thing to end on, other than wrapping up with everybody's individual thoughts. I just think it's true, Jim.
Sure.
Go ahead,
Sure.
Steve.
And with apologies to that last contribution, because I'm noticing the time and regrettably, it's probably time to start winding up. And I wondered, I first of all want to apologize if I've hijacked this discussion in the direction of helpfulness.
It was helpful.
I did it despite saying to myself at the beginning, don't do it, but I couldn't resist. But I wonder whether it wouldn't be helpful to honor the starting point, Joel, which was your question, which is how much expertise do you need in MI to be helpful? How much expertise do you need in MI to be helpful? And I wondered if we could, you know, ask Terri, Denise, and Chris, and anyone else if they could capture the essence of their answer to that question. How much expertise do you need in MI to be helpful?
How long is a piece of rope? It depends, right? It depends on how long of a piece of rope do you need? It depends on what your task is. So that there is not one answer to that question, in my opinion.
Okay.
I'm better off. I'm much happier to focus on things that I wish you wouldn't do.
Okay, that's great point to bring up that can make people feel really uncomfortable, Terri, but it's honest and it's true. It's honest and it's true. You know, as therapists, we tend to kind of give people the benefit of the doubt, particularly our colleagues. But the reality is really true. Joy, you have a thought or a question?
Thank you so much. My thought was, first of all, apologies for coming in late on the other side of the universe. So my thought to the last question is, how much expertise is as far as we would have applied MI to ourselves, the MI spirit? I think as practitioners, often we forget that compassion that we need for ourselves, the empathy, the autonomy that we give ourselves for thought is what we should use to direct or guide what we do in a situation.
It's a two-way street, isn't it? Thanks, Joy.
I love that, and Joy, and just adding to that, it seems like, I don't know, I'm starting to think that the real enough is the commitment to ongoing learning and practice. That it is that there's something that you bring to a conversation, even if you're not skilled yet, even if your skills are just starting, if you bring yourself and your commitment to the practice, that in and of itself is enough.
And Dr. Wagner.
I don't have a clear answer, and I'm just amazed by what just popped into chat. And following along with that, and Joy and Tiffany, I don't know if expertise is even is a word I want in here, but there's a skill in connecting with people and co-creating a space where there can be kind of a warm, joyful, respectful flow wherever somebody's at and wherever they're moving toward. And that interconnection, I'm reacting to the word interbeing, you know, the danger for me is thinking again about this, what we do and who clients are as separate, and getting into these kind of categories in my head. I was listening to another conversation yesterday and heard like someone say the bee, the pollinator, there is no apple tree without it. I mean, these aren't separate things. That we think of the bee and the apple tree as these two separate things, but unless they're connected, there is neither. And that with MI, there's something about that, is this communal connection. And I don't know if it's expertise, but the skill in being able to create that is, I think, what we need. Sorry, that wasn't very clear.
And Joy, you got your hand up again. You got it coming in for a second helping. Please do.
No, all hand.
Okay, false hand. All right. Well, look, Steve, you have anything you want to finish off with before we say goodbye?
Just that
Until
phrase,
next-
just that phrase, take a look in the mirror as a useful starting point.
Whoa. That's a good way to end it. I got lots of takeaways, and I'm kind of really sitting with what Terri was saying about, try to figure out what's not helpful and stop doing it. And I'm looking at that at myself more than anything right now. And, I think if what Denise was saying, that there is no endpoint in getting good at helping people, right? It's an ongoing process. And I mean, it's my vocation, it's my career, and I love it. So fortunately, we work in a field where we can do these things, and we can also grow personally and along as a part of the process. So look, I just want to say thank you, everybody who showed up. And, we, I remember the first time, Steve, you and I talked about this, I said, I want this to be like sitting in a pub and we're having a conversation. And this definitely felt like that today, with a lot of friends. And so thanks for coming along. We'll be back in a few months and we'll have a new topic. And we'll make sure we get all the dates and everything sorted out before we send out the invitation, for if that was confusing to anybody. So this will be up on YouTube and in a podcast form before too long. Terri, Denise, Chris, Steve, always a pleasure to see y'all. Jen, it's great to see you. You look quite relaxed. And we'll catch you next time.